Good morning. Bonjour, Wache. I'd like to begin by expressing my deep concern over the news of the death of Johnny Noviello, found dead in ICE custody, a man who had moved to the United States from Canada when he was 11 years old, who apparently had a drug conviction that was covered off by community service and time off for good behavior, that ICE was aware of his medical conditions, and yet he was found dead in their custody. Ce matin, je demande que le Canada puisse ouvrir une enquête indépendante sur la mort de Johnny Noviello. C'est nécessaire pour le Canada de défendre nos valeurs, notre démocratie, notre frontière et pour protéger nos citoyens qui étaient kidnappés par les predators et les gangsters américains. Earlier this week, Homeland Security Director Kristi Noem held a forum in Michigan on the so-called threat of the northern border. The northern border, that's us, Canada. She presented this lurid presentation of rape and murder, Salvadorian gangs coming over the Canadian border to terrorize the American people. She was joined by Michigan Representative John James, who said that Michigan is now at the epicenter of the northern border crisis. And one of her officials reassured the American people that they were here to, quote, kick some ass. So whose ass are you going to kick? Ever since Donald Trump declared that Canada was a threat to national security last February, the rhetoric against our nation has been escalating. FBI Director Kash Patel claims that Canada is a source for all kinds of international cabals of Russian, Iranian, Chinese gangs who are heading over the border. He claims that of the 300 terrorists that he says he caught, 85% came from Canada. But were they wearing toques and lumberjack jackets? Then there's Ted Cruz, who says that Canada could be a staging ground for Hamas terrorism. Why? Because we accepted a very small percentage of people fleeing the genocide in Gaza. The likes of Patel and Noem are not there to present facts or to meet with Canadian officials about securing the border for both sides. This is about building a narrative. This is how MAGA operates. And we've seen this right-wing playbook used so many times. This is not about gaslighting. It's about creating a convenient enemy, an existential threat that must be dealt with. What is it going to be next? Are they going to claim that they found weapons of mass destruction in a garage in Charlottetown or Oakville? You know, South Park, the movie, was funny, but South Park as a political administration is a dismal thing to witness. And this is all happening while Donald Trump threatens us. We're either going to pay billions in new tariffs or what? Give up our sovereignty, give up our nation? Well, that's not going to happen. So I'm here this morning to actually reach out to Kristi Noem and Kash Patel and Ted Cruz and MAGA Ambassador Pete Hoekstra and any Fox host who wants to weigh in on the Canadian border to reassure them. Canada is very concerned about the border as well. In fact, we're so concerned that we refuse to travel across it. And your increasing rhetoric against us is making us more determined not to spend a dime in any of your towns, your states, or your country. So let's talk about the state of the Canadian boycott right now. We see that wine sales from the United States to Canada, your number one market, America, is down 93%. That we've seen a $12.3 billion loss in American tourism. So when Representative James says the epicenter of the threat is Canada, I think he should go talk to some of his tourism operators who are seeing massive losses from Canada. Our refusal to cross the border isn't about fear. It is because we will not stoop to give money to a country that is no longer under the rule of law, where kidnapping people off the streets has become normalized. If you look at the biggest hits that are being faced by the United States in terms of Canadian refusal to spend dollars, number one is Florida. Yeah, the Florida that's talking about building an alligator Alcatraz. A Florida where states officials threaten to shoot people graveyard dead if they protest. That might sound great for MAGA, but Canadians find that language intolerable and inexcusable. And so, Mr. Ron DeSantis, no, we're not going to spend money in your state. I want to close by speaking to the American representatives who've been coming to Canada on a charm offensive to get us to come back. Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota, who said to Canadians, give us another chance. Really, Senator? I haven't heard you say anything to people like Kristi Noem or Kash Patel. When are you going to start speaking out to them?
With them, of course, is how hard they are on American tech companies, as you've mentioned, making it hard to do business, going after them with fines for antitrust issues. And we do know that it's not just about trade when it comes to doing these deals, whether it be with Canada, with the EU and other nations. It's also about protecting American business interests. So let's kind of play this out. We have seen a lot of back and forth when it comes to these trade policies and the trade deals. But if we were to go ahead with this unknown tariff rate that will be announced in a few days, what kind of implications do you think that would have on our relationship with the northern border?
Yeah, well, certainly, if you just look at the dynamic between the president and Canada in just the past couple of weeks, there have been these flashpoints where there have been points where the Canada has said that they will have retaliatory tariffs on some of our tariffs on steel and aluminum. So this relationship, which is relatively new between the new prime minister and President Trump, was already somewhat on shaky ground. In fact, I remember hearing Prime Minister Carney not sounding that optimistic after his meeting here at the White House when it comes to the overall trade deal with the United States. And when you've heard the White House talk about their deals with countries, they mention obviously the one that they inked with the United Kingdom, the new one that we're learning a bit more about with China. They point to South Korea, India, Japan. They do not point necessarily to Canada. We have not heard a lot of talk from them talking about deals either with Mexico, our neighbors down south. So this is just a continuation, potentially a more frayed relationship between the U.S. and Canada, especially if there's no other developments or any types of negotiations before the president issues that letter telling Canada, this is what you have to pay us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you kind of brought up the history of all of this, because you and I have talked so many different times, you know, especially about Canada, right? There was all of that back and forth with Ottawa, and there was going to be a tax on electricity. And then days later, you know, they were going to retaliate against us. And then all of a sudden, a couple of days later, oh, actually, we figured it out. Things are OK. So based on your reading of all of the history of this back and forth, I mean, do you think that this could be a negotiation tactic?
No, it could be, especially because Trump seems to be really honed in on that digital services tax. That was announced. That was something that Canadian officials in the past couple of weeks have been teasing could happen. Should Canada remove that, you could see the president say, all right, let's come back to the negotiation table, similar to how earlier this year, when the U.S. was going to have these big tariffs on Canada and Mexico specifically, if they didn't, change their policy on immigration, you saw then Prime Minister Trudeau kind of tweak the plan to kind of suit what President Trump wanted when it comes to immigration from the northern border. So should Canada, change that tax, this could certainly be seen as a negotiating tactic. At the same time, it could also just be seen as President Trump being a bit impatient with how these trade deals are going and saying, I want to give the tariff rate, establish that with all of these countries anyways. Let's get that done before July 9th. Yeah,
July 9th. And of course, we heard the president today even say that that could be the date. It might
Longer,
not be.
Could be shorter.
Right,
yeah.
It could be shorter. And even in that same press conference, he said, I'd love to be able to just tell these countries, here's the tariff rate, here's what we're charging. And then he actually looked to the side. I think it was Treasury Secretary Bessent that was there with him. And he said, he wouldn't like that so much. Kind of a nod to the fact that even Wall Street investors look at Bessent as sort of the calming force in this. Back to the Canada of it all, though. I mean, you've done a lot of reporting on this. What's so important about our relationship with Canada? You know, is it the trade? Is it the security? I mean, I know we get a lot of oil from them. How important in terms of that trade relationship is it?
Oil, steel, especially aluminum from Canada, which we have already placed specific tariffs on, but that is core in the relationship between the U.S. and Canada.
Oh, Canada. President Trump says the U.S. is ending trade talks with Canada, effective immediately. And he's also threatening new tariffs. He posted on social media a short time ago, "We will let Canada know the tariff that they will be paying to do business with the U.S. within the next 7-day period." Joining us now, NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans.
A twist.
I got a lot to ask you. Number one, this is stepping on good news that he had, which I think is crazy. But then number two, to explain why he is so upset with Canada, because it was just like a week ago that he and Mark Carney were palling around together as if they were buddies.
He has for a long time been fixated on dairy farmers in Canada. And he thinks the Canadian government is protecting a relatively small number of dairy farmers in Canada by putting, tariffs and quotas on U.S. dairy going into Canada. And you can see why the Canadian government will protect Canadian dairy farmers, right? Because it's a much smaller country than the United States with a lot fewer people, and that's a really important political demographic there. So this has been something that has been just the president's been fixated on, that he thinks that these relatively small number of dairy farmers are ripping off American dairy farmers. So that's sort of the basis, the genesis of part of his anger and frustration with the Canadians. But then now there's this new element of digital taxes, digital service taxes that the president says the Canadians are. So now we're back to square one again. The president's saying we're not talking at all, and we're going to, in 7 days, tell you what you're going to pay us. What's interesting to me is you just watched the president for how long was that press availability today? Was it an hour? Almost an hour?
Yeah.
It was a long time. He talked a lot about trade. He never once mentioned a snafu with Canada, right? He was really talking about other trade successes.
He has the success of his, or he's riding a win from the Supreme Court today.
Fundamentally, Canada is hitting back. They've passed new laws. Some have kept laws in place. We see Wab Kinew, the NDP premier from Manitoba, stay strong. Carney is making new threats. But I want to be clear. I want to make this clear. Carney made a mistake because he didn't listen to you, to my fellow Canadians listening, and to progressives in the States. We warned him, do not capitulate to Trump. Do not bend the knee. Do not appease, because when you appease the bully hits harder, right? I said this. He said, we're going to punch less. Trump's just going to punch you harder because he's not worried about getting bruised himself. And so, Carney whitewashed Trump's aggression against Iran. Carney whitewashed the Trump Netanyahu alliance by talking about, Palestinians need to be Zionists. A disgusting statement. Let's be clear. He's also immediately agreed to Trump's 5% GDP NATO demand without any pushback. And what was the reward for all of this? He wants to be part of Trump's dumb golden dome. What was the reward for all of that? Nada, nothing, zilch. So hopefully, Carney can follow the example of NDP leaders like Wab Kinew and say, no, just because Trump says, for real this time, we're going to get a deal, you don't let up. You keep pushing, you keep fighting. There have been some positive signs. The digital services tax being kept is a good sign, but we need to see more NDP-style action and less liberal cowardice.